Well, after 117 years, it's come down to this. Is it time to put the old 30-06 out to pasture, or should we look at it from a new perspective? Hi everyone, Ron Spomer. And I've got to tell you, I did not think I would be reporting on the 30-06, but it seems to me that this cartridge might be fading away. Now, I know everybody's going to say, are you kidding? There are millions of rifles chambered for the all-American 30-06. It does everything. It can do everything. It should do everything. But let's be honest. 10 years ago, just about everyone who brought out a new rifle first chambered it for the 30-06. If it wasn't the first one, it was in the first 3 or 4. That's what they brought it out in because so many people bought it. But these days, it seems like most rifle buyers are looking for short actions, or they're looking for some new Super 30, or something other than the plain old 30-06. And especially younger people who, of course, go for the new things. Who wouldn't? I did it when I was younger. And the 30-06 seems to be getting disrespected. But what if we look at the old 1906 30 caliber U.S. military cartridge from the perspective of today's bullets, powders, and cartridges? Is it the old 30-06, or can it hang in there with the newer cartridges? Let's give it a closer look. Now, as most of us know, the 30-06 was invented by the U.S. military in 30-06. That's why it's called the 06. They used to use "ot" for O in those days. So in 1906, they came up with it. Now, it had a predecessor in 30-03 was the name of that one. And in 1903, the government cranked out essentially the same cartridge, but it had a 220 grain round nose bullet on it. Now remember, this was in the early days of smokeless powder. And you were getting away from this idea of big, heavy bullets. So most militaries used 200 and 220 grain bullets back in the day. But they were beginning to realize there was some advantage in a sharply tipped bullet, spire points, Spitzers as the Germans called them. And we got our information firsthand from the 757 Spanish Mauser in Cuba. Hoo boy, that thing shot fast and flat in the new Mauser bolt action rifle. It was just really apparent to our military brass that we needed similar cartridge. So they came out with the 30-03. Didn't go very fast. And then they realized one of the advantages the 757 had was the spire point bullets and lighter weight. So they went to 150 grain spire point. They drove at 2,700 feet per second. Bingo, there was our new military cartridge. It became the all-American 30. Everyone knew it, everyone had it, and everyone started hunting with it. Obviously, it won World War It helped win World War I and then World War II before it was phased out for the shorter version, the .308 Winchester, the 7x6, 2x51 NATO cartridge. And that didn't stop it in the game fields. Some of the early users were Edward Stewart White, who took it to Africa. Griffin and Howe began sporterizing bolt-action Springfield military rifles, and it took off. Hemingway took it, Roosevelt took it. Lots of famous hunters went to Africa with it, as well as Alaska and Canada, and they were taking everything with this cartridge, including rhinos and even elephants. So the 30-06 really made its mark. But being Americans, we thought we needed something better. And we came out with it, and it was called the 300 Winchester Magnum, the belted Magnum. And that sort of became the new standard. That was the 30-06 on steroids, or the 30-06 Magnum. And I want to use this one to compare the old 30-06 with the old 300. Because most of us understand what the 300 Winchester Magnum can do, we have a pretty good idea of its power. We rank it better than the 30-06 because it pushes the same bullets about 300 feet per second faster. More energy, flatter shooting, drifts less in the wind. It's just a grand all-around American, African, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, this cartridge can do it all. And it's got a little more horsepower than the 30-06. So I want to use what that has done since its inception in 1963 against what the 30-06 can do now as a modern cartridge with modern bullets. So I've run up some numbers. And before we get to even bigger 30s, we're going to look at these numbers. First one we're going to compare is the 30-06 with what I think is one of the better options today, which is a 190 grain Accubon long-range bullet, or anyone like it that has a high BC. Look at the BC on this one, 0.597. Now we can give that a muzzle velocity of 2,770 feet per second. That's a lot faster than he could have driven it back in 1906. The result is a muzzle energy of 3,238 foot-pounds. You're going to get 26 foot-pounds of recoil out of that. Not bad. That's in an 8-pound rifle. You might want to go heavier. But look at the maximum point-blank range, 282 yards. That means on a 6-inch target, you can shoot out that far with a dead-on hold. The bullet won't go any higher than 3 inches. That'll happen about 150 yards. And then at about 282 yards, it will drop 3 inches below your point of aim. So there's your maximum dead-on hold for taking most game. And that really covers most of the shooting we do in the game fields. Now, run that against a 300 Win Mag. I'm sticking with an old load on this one. 180 grain core lock. Why do I go with that one that has a relatively low BC of 0.437? Why don't I use the modern bullet? Because perspective. We want to understand what the new 30-06 can do in comparison to what we've become used to over the last 50, 60 years. And most of us were shooting standard factory loads from Winchester and Remington and Federal, and they were not the sleekest bullets in the world, but by golly, they sure did the job. So why don't we compare the new 30-06 against that? And that's what I'm doing here. So the muzzle velocity on this one is rated 2,960 feet per second from Remington. And the muzzle energy on that one is a little bit higher, 3,502 foot-pounds of energy. You're going to get more recoil. You're going to pay the price with 33 foot-pounds of recoil on your shoulder, and that is a level that some people don't like. They cannot shoot without flinching. It's something to consider. So the muzzle, or the maximum point-blank range on that one is just a little bit further, 9 yards more. Not a big deal, but some people value that. So let's look at our drops and drifts. Now you can look at the 100 yards, they're pretty close. Look at 300 yards. That's pretty much where a long shot would be considered for most of us. 300 yards, you've got 4.7 inches of drop out of the 30-06, 3.8, so about an inch difference. And inch at 300 yards, guys, that's not that much. Look at your wind deflection. There's actually less wind deflection out of the 30-06 because of that higher BC bullet. So you've got a little more than an inch and a half of advantage there. Energy levels, 2,291 foot-pounds for the 06, 2,198 for the 300 Win Mag. The 30-06 is already delivering more energy on target. That's because of the new modern sleek high BC bullets. And at 600 yards, the 30-06 is dropping a couple of inches more, but it's winning by 7 inches in the wind deflection category, and it's actually carrying considerably more energy. I don't think any deer, elk, moose, or bear is going to notice the difference, guys. My point is that if you thought the 300 Win Mag, as advertised over the last 50 years or so, was the 300 to have, look at what that 30-06 is doing. You get to shoot a rifle that doesn't kick as much. It's going to weigh probably a little bit less, maybe not, but it's an option. You can lighten the weight because you have less recoil. That's why I think we need to look at the 30-06 as a sort of a new cartridge. Now, you can argue that put that same bullet on the 300 Win Mag and you're back to having it being much better than the 30-06, and that is certainly true. You can also say that we have even better magnums now that will pretty much push the 300 Win Mag off the table. And then you're talking about more recoil. Sure, you'll get more performance, but you've got a 300 Nosler and a 300 Rum and the big 378 Weatherby, but man, you're going to get some kick out of those. Now, I think perhaps the biggest competitor coming up is going to be this 300 PRC. This does almost the same actual velocity as the 300 Win Mag, but it does it with a longer, sleeker bullet that fits in some match grade chambers. That's the whole deal with this 300 PRC. It is set up for supreme accuracy if the ammo is made to spec and the rifles are chambered to spec. And they're going to have fast twist barrels to handle not only the bullets running up to 220 grains like the 30-06 does, but farther, 250 grains. So the question you have with the PRC is, how much advantage are you going to gain from it, and what are you going to pay in recoil? So let's look at some numbers on that one. And here we are going to use a higher BC bullet, 190 grain CX. That's a new copper bullet from Hornady. They are offering that in their outfitter line of factory ammunition. So I figured that was a fair test. That one has a BC of .575, a little less than this 190 grain ABLR bullet. But your muzzle velocity is a little bit more, 3,000 feet per second. That's going to give you 3,797 foot-pounds of energy, 36 foot-pounds of recoil. You stepped up 10 extra pounds on the shoulder. A lot of guys aren't going to like that. What did you do for maximum point-blank range? You just beat out the old 300 Win Mag with that really low BC bullet by only a foot. 292 feet maximum point-blank range. Once again, you're covering most hunting situations. So look at your drops and drifts on that one compared to the 30-06, especially at 300 yards. You're only dropping 2.8 inches versus 4.7, so you do have a 2-inch advantage there. The wind deflection is not all that significant, but a half-inch difference give the advantage to the PRC. Does have more energy, 2,682 versus 2,291. Again, I don't think a deer or elk's going to notice the difference. 600 yards, I'm pretty much not shooting game at that distance, but if you are, you've got a lot less drop out of that PRC, 54 inches versus 66 out of the 30-06. The wind deflection, man, you've only got a 2-inch advantage in that fancy new 300 PRC. And the energies, yeah, you've got about a 250 foot energy advantage. Again, I don't think it's going to much matter. But once again, it puts things in perspective. The 30-06 is not the old dog that so many think. It's hanging right in there just because we've used the new powders to reach about 200 feet per second more velocity than we got in the old days. And we've added those high BC bullets, and that makes a big difference. Then you also have to consider what these new bullets do with terminal performance. They've gotten so much better with controlled expansion bullets, and you've got all the hollow point copper bullets now that penetrate remarkably well. I just think the 30-06 is today better than the 300 Win Mag was in '64. So that's definitely something to consider, and I like the fact that it doesn't recoil as much as these bigger 300 Magnums. Now, another thing to consider is what you're going to use that rifle for. Most of us are deer hunters. Whitetails, mule deer, pronghorn. Maybe we'll get lucky and go mountain goat hunting or draw a sheep tag once in a lifetime or something. And we might want to go elk hunting. We might actually do quite a bit of elk hunting. I don't know. Does anyone really think that a 190 grain 308 caliber bullet carrying over 1,500 foot-pounds of energy at 600 yards is not an elk round? I think it's just fine. I've taken elk with a lot lighter bullets than that and throwing a lot less energy. But as a deer hunter, do I want to be shooting a 190 grain bullet and suffering 26 foot-pounds of recoil on my shoulder every time I pull the trigger? Maybe not. And do I need it? Probably not. Well, I think most deer hunters are looking at, say, a 150 grain bullet. And that's pretty common in 30-06s. A lot of ammunition in 150 grain because it's kind of a standard for deer hunters. It will do the job, and especially with modern bullets. So let's consider a 151 grain hammer hunter bullet, and we can drive that thing 3,000 feet per second with today's new powders and such. It doesn't have a real high BC, but it's .376, not too bad. Muzzle energy's over 3,000 foot-pounds. There's only 22 foot-pounds of recoil energy out of that 8-pound gun. And look at our maximum point-blank range. We're hanging right in there at 290 yards. To me, this is a great whitetail, mule deer, sheep, pronghorn, even coyote cartridge. So I think it's got considerable value there. You can look at your 300-yard performance, your 4 inches of drop, 7.7 of wind deflection, 1,754 foot-pounds of energy, more than enough for an elk even. And these all copper bullets like this hammer, they penetrate. Man, they really penetrate. I would put a 150 grain hammer bullet up against a 168 grain lead core bullet. And in a cup and core bullet, I'd put it up against 180 grain, and I think I'd get as much or more penetration, just because those all copper bullets don't lose a lot of weight. They just keep driving. And then at 600 yards, yeah, you're dropping 68 inches, but that's only 2 inches more than a 190 grain high BC bullet. Wind deflection at 36, 3 feet, yeah, that's considerable. And now you're under 1,000 foot-pounds of energy, but that's still right in the ballpark for what we consider enough for your deer-sized animals. So I just think it's the versatility that matters. And that's why I have all these bullets up here. This is just a small sampling of the 30 caliber bullets that are available, that you cannot necessarily find them in factory ammo, but you can certainly load them. I've seen some 125 grain loads in factory ammunition. I think I've got a box of Remington down here, and they even offer it with less recoil. So they're downloading it the same as a hand loader would. And that's great for practice. You've got these silly little plinking bullets. Not a lot of people shoot those, but if you like to use your rifle for easy practice with minimal recoil, use these lighter bullets. There's always less recoil with light bullets. We have a 100 grain round nose, 110 grain round nose. This, I believe, is a 125 grain Sierra, getting pretty sleek. That would be the great coyote load right there. And then you've got your 150s, and then you step up to the 180s, and even up to 210 grain, which is a high BC bullet from Berger. And of course, you can go higher than that. The 30-06 should stabilize up to a 220 grain bullet, sometimes even a 230 grain, depending on the length. But as you can see, we're getting fairly long here. 30-06 can handle it. And if you like to carry a big, heavy bullet for some thump up close, you would go with one of these bigger bullets, say for moose or bear in heavy cover. So you can't beat the 30-06 for versatility. Sure, you can load all of these bullets on any of the other 300s, but you're going to be burning a lot more powder. It's a little more difficult to make really light loads out of it because of the volume inside. When you reduce that powder capacity, you've got to fill that space up with something. We usually use a filler of some kind. But you can build hand loads that are only going about 1,500 feet per second with these tiny little 110 grain bullets. And that makes for some pretty easy practice. So I just would recommend that you don't write off the 30-06, especially some of you new shooters who really don't know that much about it, haven't seen it in action. Us older guys kind of grew up with it. We know it as sort of the standard against which others are judged. But man, with today's new bullets and powders, and I don't know, the performance of that round suggests to me that we shouldn't put it out to pasture. Take that new perspective and try it out. I would not hesitate to go hunting anywhere, anytime, anyhow, for the rest of my life with a 30-06. You might want to consider that too. Hey, this is Ron Spomer, hoping that I've helped you gain a new perspective on the 30-06. And if you have one, get back out and enjoy it. Try some new loads and bullets. You're going to have a blast. See you next time. Hunt honest and shoot straight.